live. It has been a fucking week, y'all. The Supreme Court has refused to block an Illinois law banning some high-power semi-automatic weapons. The Supreme Court on Thursday declined to put on hold a new Illinois law that would ban high-power semi-automatic weapons like the ones used in the mass killing of 7 people at a 2022 Chicago Pride parade. Or a 2022 parade in a Chicago suburb, sorry. The justices did not comment in refusing an emergency appeal from a gun rights group and others. The law prohibits the possession, manufacture, or sale of semi-automatic rifle and high-capacity magazines. It takes effect January 1st. Now, there is absolutely a universe where this is bad. Thank you. I don't honestly think this is that bad, though. Not because I think the ban is a good idea. The ban is stupid and dumb and should die. But the ban at bare minimum, I think the reason the Supreme Court didn't take it up is they're going to be looking at something else that will knock it down. The Supreme Court not taking something up isn't inherently saying they agree with it. It's not the same level of precedent. There are a lot of reasons why the Supreme Court could not take a case. Last month, a 3-judge panel of the 7th District U.S. Court of Appeals voted 2-1 in favor of the law, refusing a request by gun rights groups to block it. The Illinois Supreme Court separately upheld the law in a 4-3 decision. At least 8 other states in the District of Columbia have some sort of prohibition on semi-automatic weapons, and several cases challenging those laws are making their way through federal courts, relying at least in part on the Supreme Court's decision in 2022 that expanded gun rights, or Bruin specifically. And that's the thing. This doesn't jive with their other decisions. Like, this is the same court that decided Bruin. So I don't think the problem is they're suddenly hard turning on gun rights. I think there's always the possibility that there was just something that was not getting picked up in that. There is always the possibility that they screwed up the wording of something, or the justices didn't like the way the argument was being presented. It doesn't necessarily mean not hearing a case is not the same as agreeing with the result of the case. It's not the same level of precedent. Some lawyers try and argue it. I feel like that's almost in like fist banging levels of argument, where like as a lawyer, there's an old saying: if you have the law on your side, you argue the law. If you have the facts on your side, you argue the facts. And if you have neither on your side, you bang your fist as loudly as you can on the table and scream about the injustice. I think this is not good for gun rights, don't get me wrong, but this is definitely going to get challenged. There's no way this is going to stand, and that's one of the important takeaways. I think the Supreme Court not taking this up doesn't mean this is going to stay forever, because there are other things that can kill this. Other bans that could get struck down that you could point to and go, aha, well, that's the same thing. And maybe they'll like the wording that time. Maybe whatever the problem was with this case will go away. They didn't take the case and side against them. They specifically didn't take the case. That's different. We'll play games in a bit, Alice, I promise. Here, I'll switch to some of the more fun stories. Okay, this one's pretty funny. I think it speaks to a larger problem, but I also I think this is fucking hilarious, and it's too funny to not just to spill a bunch of memes over as if it was seed while masturbating, because boomers are into trans porn. Pornhub's year in review shows, and another queer category was popular with boomers too. This is an article from Anna Levine. It was published on Mashable. Let's just get into this. Porn habits can be telling. Take Pornhub's year in review. In 2022, the tube giant showed that women are increasingly on the site and watching lesbian porn. Here, Pornhub's year in review, the site's 10th, shows that boomers, which Pornhub considers people 55 and older, are increasingly watching trans porn. In terms of percent difference in popularity when compared to all other age groups, boomers were 58% more interested in trans porn than younger folks. No wonder they're furious at us. They can't stop masturbating whenever they see us, and we're like screwing up their day. They keep seeing us and getting horny, and this is the problem. It's the absolute definition of you make me horny, and that's your problem. Contrast this with 2022 research. Yeah, transgender 55 plus is 58% more likely than the average. Contrast this with 2022 research from the Pew Research Center, where 41% of 50 to 64-year-olds and 42% of adults 65 and older said that society has, quote, gone too far in accepting trans people. I think the thing is they have these masturbatory fantasies. Because I think a lot of the problem is there is a non-zero percentage part of the population that has been taught to feel shame around anything sexual that isn't normal sexuality. There is I'm editing a video right now talking about the Gundys and how they have been absolutely shit, and how some of the people at the front have been like spreading some absolutely hateful nonsense. And I went through, I was trying to highlight the fact that Garand Thumb he built his entire fucking channel identity around the idea of, shitting on queer folk. Like, he has hundreds of videos that he starts. The bit of his channel identity that is acceptable, or the bit of his channel identity that people recognize because he does it so fucking often, is literally him talking about how my gender is ridiculous. And I went through cutting up images of him. And the thing is, I have a bunch of videos of him making this same kind of joke, but he looks like the exact average of like white protagonist number 2 from generic action movie number 7. It's almost disgusting how average and normal he looks, that it's actually difficult because he always wears the same fucking plaid shirt, same waspy haircut. He eternally looks like the same generic protagonist. And trying to cut multiple videos of him together, the problem was making it look like they're multiple fucking videos. Like, he always looks like a generic protagonist. It's actually difficult to cut his videos together and make them look like they came from separate videos, unless he's wearing gear. Then you can like, oh, it's the one where he's wearing that versus the one where he's wearing that. Like, the thing that changes on him is the gun. It's kind of telling that is the thing that has the most personality about his like image, is the fucking firearm. Yeah, seriously. And I think the problem is also, if you are a thing that exists in the porn world, there are a lot. Kirkland John Krasinski. John Krasinski ordered on Wish.com. Speaking of CIA psyops, yeah, I think there is a legitimate problem where you have a lot of people, and this is highlighting it, that like they view transness as something that turns them on, and they are freaked the fuck out about what that means for their day-to-day life. And their solution is to lean into you're allowed to hate things you jack off to. That's not to say watching porn makes you accepting. There are certainly boomers who are trans or otherwise queer themselves. Considering Gen Z is the most LGBTQ generation thus far, 20.8% identify as queer compared to 2.6% of boomers, according to a Gallup poll. It's notable that trans porn is more popular among the latter. And that's not the only queer category on the boomer list. Bisexual male is 38% more popular among boomers. Boomers are into femboys. They're into the things that piss them off. It pisses them off because they want to fuck them and have them as partners, and they don't want the hate that would come from that. They can recognize their life would get worse because of the things they have said and done in the past and agreed with, because of the community they have fostered and the worlds they are fostering. And their solution is to dig the fuck in. And I think that's why it seems like there is this infinite source of frustration that we don't have an answer for. This is fucking it. Like, it's funny, don't get me wrong. They are jacking off to us, and I like, sugar daddies, come give me your money, whatever. Like, we'll figure it out. But that's the problem. This is a thing that they can engage with virtually. This is a thing they can engage with as a fantasy, as a thing with a layer of separation. You know, they're on Pornhub. Okay, yeah, sure. It's a 58% jump over the normal population is watching trans stuff. That means they, on the one hand, they are masturbating to it, but given the ridiculously high rates of hate and pushback, it starts to become pretty clear that this isn't just... This is funny, don't get me wrong, but I think it also speaks to a lot. Yeah, exactly, Bo. It's always... there is a sexual repression problem here. And I think this is where it also speaks to the answer being education. Because... yeah, the smoking porn thing, I think that comes from the fact that like boomers grew up in an era when that was sold as sexy. Yeah, that boomer trauma is showing. Honestly, it shows a fair amount of interesting stuff about the population. Right. They don't want... Everybody assumes what's going on behind their own eyes is normal until proven otherwise. They don't want trans girls, femboys as lover partners. They want them as sex objects and think that's acceptable. So when their stroke fantasy gets up and walks around like a person, that is not okay. Yeah, exactly. 100%. They have this like fantasy ideal of what it means to be trans and to be a femboy, and all of it is like, it's this weird sexual fantasy that they have, that it's supposed to be hidden and they enjoy it anyway, and they have all of these components that will get built into it. And then when they see somebody who is not a part of that, who is giving them the same feelings but isn't participating in the other part of the fantasy of feeling ashamed, of shrinking by them, it becomes a frustration. And I think, I don't know why, but that just reminded me of that one episode of House where the sex doll just kills a guy. That doesn't seem like a House episode or Supernatural. These are slightly different shows in the way they present things. Although, to be honest, thinking about it, there's some ridiculous shit on House. Like, don't get me wrong, they have a fair amount of it is somewhat grounded. Like, it seems less like the kind of thing that has very fine medical care taken to it, and more like they run the scripts past somebody who vaguely knows medicine. Right, exactly. That also speaks to exactly what the problem is. Having this idea of you are a sexual object, and then you move out in the universe, and I am seeing you as a sexual object. Anyone seeing you must see you as a sexual object. What do you mean you're going to your kids? You're a sexual object. God, now I kind of want to make an entire episode around like how queerness kind of turns people into sexual objects. I feel like that this in and of itself kind of highlights something important in society. Although, forgive me if I ever devolve into dicknanigans. Okay, this is a little bit more serious, but at bare minimum, we get to just spam based in the chat. So, because it turns out Hunter Biden is based. Like actually based on gun control. It's now Hunter Biden versus Joe Biden. This is an article by Charles C.W. Cook. I'm going to pop it into the chat real quick. It looks like we're going to get the Hunter Biden versus Joe Biden Second Amendment case after all. Here's Axios. The gun charges against Hunter Biden are unconstitutional under the Second Amendment, and this case should also be dismissed as a collapsed plea agreement still grants him immunity, his attorney said in federal court filings on Monday. He is free-based, don't get me wrong, but he is based. His basing is kind of a free basing, don't get me wrong, but he is based. Lowell also addressed Hunter Biden's indictment that alleges he illegally owned a gun as a drug user and that he lied on a federal firearm purchase, arguing that recent court rulings mean the charges were unconstitutional. His lawyer is arguing it is unconstitutional to ban drug users from owning guns. He is flat out making you should be able to own you should be able to own guns to defend your pot farm argument. Like, Hunter Biden, you based. He's making the argument in court against his father's judicial team. This is amazing on multiple levels. Posted pictures of him buying people? I have not seen that. I have seen the pictures of him like eating fried chicken naked, and I don't want to see more of those. I've seen the pictures of him doing drugs I saw the video of him doing 180 doing drugs on the freeway, which on the one hand, like, we should have a conversation about how he's being treated wildly different than somebody else would have been in the exact same position, entirely because of the color of his skin. Like, you're talking about the color of his skin and the position of his father. But I don't know. I think I can legitimately appreciate somebody who is clearly as hardcore ACAB as Hunter Biden is. Like, straight up arguing, no, the fact that I can't have drugs and guns at the same time is against my constitutional rights. Because persons protected by the Second Amendment can no longer be denied gun ownership due to simple past drug use, a practice inconsistent with this nation's historical traditions on firearms, any false statement by Mr. Biden concerning his status as having used a controlled substance no longer concerns, quote, any fact material to the lawfulness of the sale of a firearm. Quite simply, asking Mr. Biden's status as a user of a controlled substance is constitutionally irrelevant to whether he can be denied his Second Amendment right to gun ownership. Hunter Biden, ya based. Single-handedly out here telling his father's gun control package to shove it. Like, no. It is unconstitutional to tell drug users you can't have guns. Oh, I gotta love it. You gotta love it. By recent court rulings, Axios means Bruin, a case that President Biden loathes. As Hunter Biden's lawyer notes, the standard layout in Bruin is that any law that is inconsistent with the nation's historical tradition on firearm regulation should be held to be presumptively unconstitutional. Because neither the founding generation nor the Reconstruction generation imposed a total prohibition on drug users purchasing or possessing firearms, Hunter Biden's team suggests their clients cannot be prosecuted for having refused to divulge his identity when he bought a gun. You gotta love it. Historically, there have been many laws that temporarily govern possession of firearms. If, for example, you were obviously drunk, you could be disarmed. but there have been none that linked generalized drug use with the loss of the right to keep and bear arms. As such, Hunter Biden's lawyer concluded, asking about Mr. Biden's status as the user of a controlled status is constitutionally irrelevant to whether he can be denied his Second Amendment right to gun ownership, and the case must fall. Which, like, that is legitimately, if that goes through, there are a lot of cases that, like, that could affect. Because the number of people where they had a gun charge that the vast majority of the reason the gun charge existed is because they couldn't own a gun. Some of those people might just be getting out clean, as they fucking should. I think the argument is strong, but Biden does not. As a matter of fact, Joe Biden thinks that the framework that made the defense possible contradicts both common sense and the Constitution and should deeply trouble us all. It is going to be extremely awkward for Joe Biden to see his own son fighting a prosecution that has been laid by his own Department of Justice on legal grounds that he had argued make America less safe and ought to be reversed. This is flat out Hunter Biden saying, fuck my father's bullshit gun control. I do not care. Fuck y'all, I'm getting mine. That is the other problem with this. Hunter Biden isn't coming out and publicly campaigning against gun control. He's not spreading this wealth. He is a white guy who is getting away with this. And it is absolutely worth calling out that this is very much a difference that would only exist with somebody who is white and wealthy and privileged, because he is out and writing books and collecting fees and doing speaking engagements and doing a lot of the economics of life while he's facing charges for guns and drugs, the kind of charges that, frankly, if he wasn't white, he would be in fucking jail over. And the fact that, on the one hand, it's awesome that he's like, okay, well, I'm going to make the truly righteous argument and say this isn't okay for anyone and stand my fucking ground rather than cut an easy deal. That is at least somewhat admirable, but it's worth pointing out the position of fucking privilege he's doing that from. And, like, I don't know. It goes both ways. Yeah, instead of having a permanent destruction of his future capabilities, he's getting nice brunches with friends. This one's a fun one, at least. Florida has banned trans and non-binary teachers from using their correct pronouns, and they are suing. It's not fun. This is not fun, but at bare minimum, they're fighting back. And hopefully, it sounds like the lawsuit has legs. They could be investigated, fined, fired, and permanently barred from teaching over students using their correct pronouns. 3 Florida teachers are suing state officials over HB 1069, a law that forbids them from using pronouns that don't match the sex they were assigned at birth. The law says that any employee or contractor of K-12 public schools can't tell students about their, quote, preferred personal title or pronouns if they do not match the sex they were assigned at birth. If they do, they could be suspended, investigated, fined, suspended, fired, have their teaching licenses revoked, and be placed on a list preventing them from having their license reinstated. They flat out just said, fuck you if you're a trans teacher. One of the plaintiffs, identified as Miss Wood, a transgender math teacher at Leonard High School, legally changed her name and gender on her government-issued identity documents. However, after HB 1069 became law, her principal told her she could no longer refer to herself as Miss, even though she had done so for years prior. Instead, the principal said she had to start referring to herself as teacher, an awkward title that made her feel stigmatized. Most students still call her Miss Wood, while others call her Teacher Wood. She feels anxiety and distraction knowing that she could lose her teaching license because her students still refer to her as Miss. If a student misgenders her, she's forbidden by law from correcting them. Another plaintiff, a non-binary science and physics teacher named Mix Schwandes, was fired from virtually teaching in October because she refused to stop using they, them pronouns and miss instead of mix. Though HB 1069, subsection 3, Florida has stigmatized plaintiffs, threatened their psychological well-being, upended the respect that is owed to them as educators, and that is necessary for a safe workplace and functioning classroom, and put their professions and family well-beings on the line, the lawsuit states, which DeSantis doesn't even really give a fuck about this. The only reason he pushes this shit is he needs a handful of conservatives to give him a pile of money, and they are so backwards and broken that they care about this shit. That's the only reason this stuff gets pushed. He's going to get quoted in a minute, and I almost don't give a fuck. It is painful the way that they are openly and specifically telling queer people to go fuck themselves, and it's only going to get worse from here. The lawsuit also says that HB 1069 unlawfully discriminates against the teachers based on sex in violation of Title VII in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, Title IX of the section of the Education Amendments of 1972, and the 2020 Supreme Court decision Bostock v. Clayton County, which ruled that anti-queer discrimination is a form of sex-based discrimination forbidden by federal law. The plaintiff's lawyers point out the Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and his administration have said that HB 1069 is necessary to protect children from indoctrination and woke gender ideology, but neither legislatures nor any provisions in the law explain how it advances those goals. Through all of these laws, Florida intentionally sends the state-sanctioned, invidious, and false message that trans and non-binary people and their identities are inherently dangerous, especially to children. Florida's goal behind these laws is to stigmatize and demonize trans and non-binary people and relegate them from public life altogether. This is straight up the Jugendverbe myth, which is when the Nazis tried to scare people into submission, into arguing that they should just let them do what they want. One of the things that they started to spread, one of the ways they tried to elevate hate for queer people, was this idea that queer people were corrupting the youth. They started saying that queer people and the acceptance of queer people, and specifically queer activists who had been working to, reduce the suicide rate and hatred that queer people, especially young queer people, feel directly. And they pushed the idea that they were corruptors of youth. That's what Jugendverbe literally translates to. Jugend is the young, and the Verbe is corrupter. The famous pictures of Nazis burning the book burnings that you have seen pictures of, that's the Hirschfeld Institute. That was a library and medical clinic, the first modern trans medical clinic that focused on queer people, trans people, the idea of having people of varying genders, of having trans people transition medically using hormones. A lot of that was heavily documented here. A lot of the modern medical practices can trace their roots to the Hirschfeld Institute. And the Nazis fucking burned it. And they claimed at the time, this is a proof of how we are freeing the youth from corruption. That is why they do this shit. Because if they can tie being queer to being a pedophile, they can much more easily argue that not just anything short of or including killing us is a good thing for society. I am kind of horrified to see where this is going to head. Yeah, unfortunately, you're right about that, Alice. And if you need proof of where this is heading, this is an article that came out today. And don't get me wrong, this happened last night, and it's horrifying that this happened. But I am going to start out. I need to say very clearly, fuck you, NBC. Fuck you, Matt Lavietes. Y'all misgendered an assault victim. And, yeah, this is important to show, but Jesus fucking Christ, get your shit together. Lesbian and trans women beaten by group of men in Miami. At least 2 queer women were beaten by a group of men in Miami. Video exclusively obtained by NBC Southern Florida shows. And what people say they are investigating is a possible hate crime. The incident took place in Miami's Wynwood neighborhood, known worldwide for its art galleries and colorful street murals, on November 26th, which obtained footage of the encounter of the victims this week. The video shows multiple men attacking the woman and their male friend trans woman does not mean male friend, and fuck out of here with that goddamn language. You're literally announcing to the world she was assaulted for being trans. The least you can do is recognize her humanity and why they hate her. Like, this shit is not okay. This group of guys, basically, they just started screaming stuff at us, anti-lesbian comments like you're only lesbians because you haven't received actual, and he used a profanity word, one of the victims, who asked that her name not be published due to fear of retaliation from her attackers, told NBC South Florida in a video interview. The victim said she was punched in the face several times and may need surgery as a result. One of the victims, who asked that her name not be published for the same reason as her friend, said she was beaten until she lost consciousness. This shit right here is why this is so dangerous. This is happening in Florida because there is so much misinformation and bullshit being actively pushed. People think being queer means pedophile. Look, I think anybody who isn't angry and wants to violently attack people who abuse kids, at best is a soft liberal and at worst needs their head examined. I think pedophiles absolutely are repugnant and in need of a strong, violent response. The problem is, you have a lot of people who are trying to paint all queer people as pedos and then pushing the wood chipper imagery. And that's a fucking problem. Canada has passed the most ridiculous anti-gun law that I have seen in a while. And while I'm sitting here like, oh, the Supreme Court not taking the case is a little problematic, we don't have this level of bullshit to deal with, so like... You know what? Now, I will fully admit I do not fully understand the Canadian legal system. It's like partially the English legal system. It still needs to get ascended to the British Crown, which, like, what the fuck? You don't even have a democracy? Like, y'all are still fucking subjects. Are you kidding me? So I don't know the exact process of like how things get sent up and what frog needs to be kissed and whatever fucking thing, how it works up there. So I might get some of like the specifics of the law wrong. Liberal gun control passes, Senate becomes law. The federal liberal government contentious gun control bill C-21 passed the Senate without changes on Thursday, becoming law on Friday. The bill passed the House of Commons in May after months of division and political acrimony. The version that made it to the Senate was significantly expanded from what the federal government had initially tabled a year prior. Bill C-21 passed by a vote of 60 to 24 and with applause from the upper chamber. The legislation includes measures to tighten gun laws to include red flag and yellow flag provisions related to gun owners posing a risk to themselves and others. So basically easy ways for the cops to disarm people they don't like. Imposing a freeze on the sale, purchase, or transfer of handguns in Canada. Wow! Okay, so yellow flag... This is going to be a little bit controversial because I have a strong 2A following. I am very proud of that. I wish they did yellow flags instead of red flags. Yellow flags are specifically programs for people who may pose a psychological threat to themselves. However, yellow flags are far more voluntary. You don't call somebody else in. A yellow flag is or at least the ones that I've seen that I've been like, oh, that's actually fucking smart. It's like if you're feeling suicidal and you have guns around and you don't want to surrender your guns. You're like, I'm going to be, if I can just get through this next week, I'll be fine. I'm just kind of spinning out. A yellow flag there's a hotline you can call where they will come, they'll take them for a week. It's not a legal transfer, so you don't need to pay for it in either direction. For communities that are very spread out, and especially given there's a lot of people that feel wildly self-conscious about their mental health stuff and don't want to like talk about it with other people. Yeah, I can at least see the utility of those. They're the version of red flag laws that like people want to pretend like red flag laws are. Because most red flag laws are just fucking horrifying. They're basically an easy way for the cops to disarm pretty much anybody they want. There's supposed to be control mechanisms around it, but like they can pretty much like the vast majority of red flag laws I have seen are they're purposefully anti-gun for activists. Basically, they're a way of disarming people they don't like. Yellow flag. The problem with the local gun store thing is federally that is a transfer. You can't just give your guns to a gun store and get them back without a background check. The reason why yellow flag laws are necessary is you can kind of short circuit that law. Because a lot of the laws around that say if it's taken in by police for judiciary or evidentiary reasons, and they basically wrote the law saying, okay, we consider the prevention of suicide in this capacity a part of the judiciary encumbrance in that provision, and as such, you do not need a background check to receive your firearms again. I don't hate it. I hate the fact that it's tied to red flag laws so often. I wish they were separated because it's one of those things where it's like, that is the good idea that is supposed to help people swallow poison. Yellow flag laws are not as terrifying as red flag laws. Yellow flag laws are legitimately okay, we need to talk about how we're going to deal with mental health as a society. And I think that is like that combined with a network of people doing that, combined with education, combined with a couple other things, you could have a real impact. The problem is they're tied to red flag laws every fucking time. And rightfully, gun rights advocates shoot them down every fucking time. Not because the yellow flag part's bad, but because the law that it's inside of is terrifying. It also adds a prospective criminal code, quote, technical definition of what constitutes a prohibited assault-style firearm meant to cement in law a permanent ban on future models once the bill comes into force. So to be clear, from what I understand of this, there are workarounds for some of the assault weapons ban in Canada. All of them are getting specifically banned, and then they are saying any attempts to work around the edges of this will count as a violation, which is just, how the fuck does any law work like that? I would much rather call a friend I trusted and have them take my guns off if I was feeling that way. I have been close to doing that. I do hear what you're saying. I think it depends on the person. It's also hyper personal. And there are a lot of people that won't get help, that refuse to go to therapy, that don't want to go, and because they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to acknowledge it for an extended period of time. But maybe they can acknowledge they don't need to have that shotgun for a week. And honestly, anything that keeps the most number of people alive is a good idea. That is it's not a hard and fast rule, but a lot of the time when it comes to stuff like firearms and mental health, stuff like this will help keep some people alive. And even if a lot of people aren't going to utilize it, I can see its utility. I fucking hate the stuff it's tied to. there are so many red flag laws that include this portion that, like, it should not be this thing that you have to swallow. It is a necessary, like, I'm not even going to say it's a good idea. It's a fucking necessary component of having safe firearms ownership. The ability to say, yeah, I don't need to be around guns right now. Especially if it comes to something like, if you have 10, if you have a collection, if you have something that your friends aren't comfortable having in their house. There's a lot of reasons why you might have either a collection that's too large or something that's weird that someone doesn't want to have to deal with. SBR or SBS stuff, you can't just lend that shit out. Anything that's integrally suppressed, anything that has any sort of stamp, that shit can't just be lent to a friend. That is, like, it's a federal felony to just lend that stuff out. Yeah, everything NFA is, you would be in wildly problematic spaces if you let your friend just take that home for a day. Yeah, anything NFA, it changes the scale of it. And perhaps most importantly, it makes everything ridiculously specifically outlined, because you're supposed to ask permission for everything, including, oh, I'm just lending it to a friend. No, there's a specific provision about you. If you're lending it to a friend, you need to fill out this paperwork. They need to get a background check. You're basically paying for another fucking stamp. It's a process. A series of provisions. But they are getting a series of provisions meant to make it illegal to make or buy ghost guns. The whole 80% industry is getting shut down in Canada. Oh, that sucks. Wait. Ooh, that's interesting, because 3D printed guns are considered ghost guns. How are they banning... Oh, I wonder what that's going to mean for parts in Canada. I would say I do appreciate the wording to make it clear that the government's intent to uphold Indigenous treaty rights. They are actively sending Mounties to shit on those treaties, like, right now. Like, now o'clock. There is people in Mountie uniforms who are helping fuck up the Wakiwa camp that is currently in Ottawa, that is protesting the oil pipeline in Ottawa. The idea that, like, there are multiple groups in Canada that are protesting, that are desperately fighting, and they're like, oh, we intend to respect your rights, while we're actively shitting on them. Like, kind of highlights how they feel about everyone. That was a better place to pause it, because that was, at least, whatever's going wrong in America, at least Canada's fucking worse. It's reassuring to know we are not the biggest dumpster fire on the continent. Thank you, Canada, for saving us once again. Decency through relativity. Oh, okay. That feels like a decent place to pause for a little bit. All right, we'll be back in like 15-20 minutes. See you in a minute.